browsers, so that one gives them chance to grow, and in the long run they make it big.
My name is Livia Tusime, a member of Nature Rave.
Is Joram Oteba, a student of Uganda Wildlife Research and Training Institute, located in Katwe Kabatoro, Kasese district. Is left by these grazers and the browsers, so that one gives them chance to grow, and in the long run. Right here we are in Queen Elizabeth National Park, found in western part of Uganda, and we are on research about the plant invasive species that have caused more plant diversity loss.
In the wild, the big five animals are said to be environmental regulators, but invasive plant species have continued to cause plant diversity loss.
The issue of whether nature has failed to take its course is now a big concern.
Welcome to the Nature Rave. We are deeper into Uganda, always paving ways through the thickets
to bring you the wilderness on the screen of your device. Invasive plant species are those which, when introduced in an area, tend to eliminate the native plants in that area. You may wonder how they do it, but that's nature. Dicrostachys cinerea, and commonly known as sickle bush, is the most stubborn invasive plant species in Queen Elizabeth National Park. Its invasion has called for cut down, especially in the areas around Mwea Peninsula. The sickle bush grows up to a height of around 4 meters and is mainly characterized by a hard woody thorn that makes it very difficult for animals to digest. This implies that the sickle bush is not fed on by most of the animals, and this gives it freedom to survive.
Right here, we are making research about the invasive species. We are in Queen Elizabeth National Park right now. Invasive species, for example, one of them is the Euphorbia candelabrum. It came to be that it occupies most of the parts in Queen Elizabeth, and one of them is because it has a strong seed bank.
Invasive species in Queen Elizabeth National Park. For example, on my right hand side, we are seeing Azimate trachatha, which is a common invasive plant species in Queen Elizabeth National Park, and it has almost dominated this shrub as you are seeing here, and it is a very dangerous invasive plant species that we need to eradicate.
Oh, big up to these trailblazers. They head up to a garden of Panthenium hysterophorus, a newly discovered invasive plant species in Queen Elizabeth National Park. The wildlife managers say that this plant has not been here for the past 6 years. It has just been observed for less than 3 years. The plant possesses a high flowering rate, which means a high rate of dispersal. Research so far has it that it is not fed on by any animal, and this allows it to survive freely in the environment. But then, if you observe here, it is cut, and the cut seems to be of an animal, which I can't personally tell at the moment. The wilderness is never quiet, but keep listening. There is something special with this plant. In this research session, we find out that the plant's flowers are fed on by gray-headed sparrows.
It's Gilbert Dileo, and I'm one of the research officers working at Uganda Wildlife Research and Training Institute. Yeah, thank you.
In an exclusive interview with the Senior Research Officer of Uganda Wildlife Research and Training Institute, these were the inquiries. Mr. Gilbert, it is said that the big five animals in the game are environmental regulators. As a senior researcher, can you conclude now that nature has failed to take its course?
That is an interesting question, especially for those of us who are into conservation. You know, when you talk about the big five and you look into their ecological roles, the ecological roles they play in ecosystems, for example, engineering the ecosystems or habitats. Yeah, but there is where their limit also stops. So when that doesn't happen, there are other factors that also affect their ecological roles. For example, invasive species, invasive plant species that I'm sure you are all aware of, and these plants basically they have their characteristics. They have biological characteristics that enable them actually to grow up very fast and ending up replacing many plant species and also other animal species around. So when the big five, especially when their population is low, at times it becomes very hard for them to play their ecological roles, especially when it comes to engineering the ecosystems. So basically why we come is because we have to intervene, right? You can't just watch the habitats being eaten up by invasive species and you have nothing to do. Yeah, actually when you look at ecology itself, yeah, and you looking at ecosystems, the principle is that everything natural must remain natural without human intervention. But that is where we have to intervene, because if you keep watching the habitats being messed up because of invasive species, so it basically becomes very hard for us to ensure that our wildlife sustainably exists in this ecosystem. So the reason why we intervene is that at times nature fails to take its action, and it starts to intervene to make sure every ecological process runs smoothly.
Invasive plant species produce toxic chemicals into the soil, making it unfavorable for the native plants to grow.
Oh, sorry. In these areas where invasion of these plant species is very high, they have even left a bare ground because they cease the grasses from growing. What a loss! Once again, Mr. Gilbert, to what extent is the invasion of these plant species a threat to plant diversity?
Basically here we are talking about Queen Elizabeth National Park. That is where we are located, and all our research starts from home. So I'm going to talk about Queen Elizabeth, and yeah, the question is asking for the impact, how these invasive plant species have impacted on plant species biodiversity. Yeah, that is very interesting, and people have done research all over, and Queen Elizabeth inclusive, and you realize that these invasive species, they have a variety of impacts. Some are negative, some are positive, but the reality is that where you find there is an invasion, yeah, species richness, species diversity and abundance is low compared to areas that are not invaded. So these invasive species, having those aggressive characteristics, they have the ability to the ability to displace the native plant species, so leaving the areas, yeah, unproductive for other biodiversity to benefit from. So one thing we have to also realize is that most of these invasive species, for example, the concrete weed that we call Parthenium hysterophorus, and also other species such as Lantana camara, talk of Dicrocystis cinerea, and so on. These plants, they have some chemicals that they produce, yeah, and these chemicals are called allelopathic chemicals. For example, Parthenium produces a chemical called the parthenin, and these chemicals, what they do is they inhibit the growth of any other plant species around where they are. So that means yeah, there is going to be displacement of a variety of native plant species, ranging from grasses to herbs and other species. So those are some of the key impacts of these invasive species on plant species biodiversity.
Lantana camara. This plant seems usual that even it is used as an ornament in some home compounds, but is said to be a serious invasive plant species that produces allelopathic chemicals into the soil, and this makes the soil's condition unfavorable for other plants to grow. Does the invasion of the plant species in discussion have an effect on animal diversity?
Very interesting. And you know, when you talk about biodiversity, you know, there is an interconnection between the animal life and plant life. Plants depend on animals in one way or the other. Animals also depend on plants in one way or the other. So we are talking about the impact of invasive species on native plant species. So I earlier on told you that wherever there are invasive species, yeah, the native plant species are going to be displaced. Yeah, they are going to be displaced, and species richness, species diversity, and abundance is going to be lowered. And these include the grasses that are fed on by the herbivores or the grazers. Yeah. So when this happens, what results is that the animals that depend on these plant species, these indigenous plant species that formerly existed in this place, the animals are too going to be affected. Yeah, the animals will not have grass to feed on, so that means that yeah, they are going to be displaced. So they will lack food, and again, some of these species, for example, when you look at Dicrocystis cinerea, it is actually it is the biggest challenge Queen Elizabeth is facing when you talk about invasive plant species. So what happens is that where there is invasion, animals are going to move away from such places because they have no food, they have no grass to feed on. So what they do is they try to move far distances to look for open areas where they can get food in terms of grass and so on. So these invasives, they have adverse impacts on animal biodiversity. For example, movement patterns are altered, the distribution patterns are altered, and so on. Those are some of the key impacts. And again, as I told you, some of these invasive species, they have chemicals that they produce, and once animals feed on these plants, the animals are going to take in the chemicals, and these chemicals, they are poisons. Actually, they are poisons. So that means the physiological processes are going to be affected. You find animals are going to start losing their normal physiological processes, for example, changes in blood chemistry and so on. So those are some of the few impacts of such invasive species on animal biodiversity. Thank you.
with it is that it has a familiar group of plants that can grow around it, forming a group of thicket. As a conservationist, aren't the intervention measures being taken to eradicate dicrostachys cinerea at Moya Peninsula a deliberate action of animal habitat destruction?
When you talk about the measures being taken to eradicate the invasive species in Moya, mostly here we are talking about dicrostachys cinerea. Yeah, this is the invasive plant that has drawn attention of many researchers, including us at the Wildlife Research Institute. Yeah, so you can realize that the plant has almost taken up about 10% or even more of the total area of the park. So what does this mean? Yeah, the plant also being an aggressive plant, it spreads very fast. So what happens is that the Queen Elizabeth National Park that we used to know back in the days to be a total grassland protected area or national park has lost that integrity. Yeah, so why intervene? That's why in Moya Peninsula, that's where you see people cutting down the plant. Those are just interventions, and it is not only in Moya. Also, when you follow this channel track, the road that connects from Moya to Katunguru via the Kazinga channel, there are plots there for intervention. So it is not a move to deteriorate the ecosystem, but we are trying to ensure that this species is managed, it is removed, so that Queen Elizabeth National Park can once again come back to the original state that used to be there back in the days.
The big five animals, which includes the elephant, try to regulate the environment by breaking down these invasive species, thus limiting their growth, and this maintains the carrying capacity of a conservation area. But continued invasion of these plant species has created big concern that in the 5 to 10 years to come, Queen Elizabeth National Park may be having only 10 plant species, and this means plant biodiversity loss. Let's get back to Mr. Drileo Gilbert to tell us about the progress of the research project.
Talking about the current research that Uganda Wildlife Research and Training Institute is running on invasive species, one thing you have to understand is that our research is focusing on three major invasive species. One of them is the dicrostachys cinerea, which you can call succubus. Then the second one is Lantana camara, and the third one is the Parthenium hysterophorus that I mentioned earlier on. So these are the three invasive species of concern. So what happens is that a proposal was written, the proposal was written, approved, and funds were allocated for this research project. So a team was constituted at the initial start of this project. So the team currently running this project is composed of two organizations, the Institute and the Uganda Wildlife Authority. So we are working in partnership with the Uganda Wildlife Authority, especially the research and monitoring team from Katunguru Park headquarters. So after having this team, every member in this team has an area or an activity area that he or she belongs to. So we have about 7 different activities, ranging from the group that does mapping and georeferencing. There are other people who are into communities, looking at the socio-economic impacts of these invasives on local communities. There are groups monitoring animal species, in these research plots, and there are those also monitoring plant species, biodiversity in these areas. So basically, we have 3 plots. We have 3 research plots for all those 3 species that I mentioned, and we did what is called a systematic review, systematic literature review, because the idea here is that by the end of this research, we are able to come up with scientific proofs that or models that can be adopted by Uganda Wildlife Authority in trying to manage some of these invasive species. So we did the literature review, and were able to come up with some of the interventions that have been used elsewhere. Talk of Cuba, talk of Australia, talk of South Africa, talk of Kenya, and so on. So we have come up with all the lists of the interventions that we want to test in these research plots. So in the plots, we have already done baseline data collection. You know, before you start doing any intervention, first of all, you have to understand the current state of the habitat or the area you are going to deal with, so that with time you are going to have it easy when you are trying to monitor or when you are trying to measure senses due to the interventions that you have brought. So we did a baseline data collection that ran from April up to around June. That was last year, 2021. So the baseline is done, and we have identified areas that we want to focus on for intervention. So some of the interventions that we are going to use are generally biological, there is chemical, there is physical, or manual. So that is where we are at the moment. So apart from that, we are also looking at introducing some other techniques to reinforce the interventions that we are going to apply. For example, we are going to bring a briquette making machine that will be able to make briquette out of the invasive plants that we are going to uproot. Yeah. So those are some of the alternative interventions or alternatives that can be used to make money out of the invasives. Then on top of that, also we are also thinking of starting up drug discovery. Most of these invasive plants are medicinal. They have medicinal properties. So one of our research projects that is coming on is going to look at the medicinal or the antibiotic potential of these invasives. So we are going to extract chemicals from these plants, and we try to test them in the laboratory to see which bacteria, which fungi, or which viruses can be disorganized or can be killed by these extracts that we are going to get from these invasives. So there is a lot you will expect from this research.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
And thanks for your time.
Yes.
Oh, thank you for moving with us. You've been a very good viewer. Follow us and subscribe for more updates from the wild. We are the Nature Rave, and we are deeper into Uganda.